The 12 Tribes of Ishmael, Unlocking God's Secrets in Ancient Lineage. When most people think of Ishmael, they remember him simply as Abraham's first son, born to Hagar, a maidservant, in a time of human impatience and divine promise. But the story of Ishmael is far deeper, more complex, and far more prophetic than many realize. His life, his lineage, and the 12 sons who became the tribes of Ishmael are woven into the tapestry of God's plan for nations, history, and spiritual revelation. These tribes, often overlooked, carry hidden truths about God's faithfulness, his covenantal promises, and the consequences of choices intertwined with human emotion and divine intervention. The Bible records that Ishmael's descendants spread across regions, forming nations whose influence echoes even in our modern world. Each tribe had a name, a destiny, and a place in God's overarching narrative. Genesis 17:20 shows that God promised to bless Ishmael and make him fruitful, yet he also revealed that his covenant would be fulfilled through Isaac. This duality of promise and divine plan teaches a profound spiritual lesson. God's faithfulness is unwavering, even when human actions introduce complications, impatience, or conflict. Understanding the 12 tribes of Ishmael is not just a lesson in genealogy or history. It is a key to understanding God's sovereignty over nations, his purpose in human events, and the spiritual lessons embedded in his word. The story of Ishmael's descendants intersects with Israel, with prophecy, and with the unfolding of divine judgment and blessing. By examining their origins, their historical impact, and their modern relevance, we gain insight into God's meticulous orchestration of history and his ability to bring about his promises despite human imperfection. In this message, we will uncover the hidden truths about Ishmael and his 12 tribes. You will learn how these tribes shaped history, influenced nations, and offer spiritual lessons that are deeply relevant to believers today. We will explore the promises, the struggles, and the divine plan reflected in their legacy, revealing truths that challenge assumptions, deepen understanding, and illuminate God's hand at work in ways you may never have realized. The story of Ishmael is not just ancient history. It is a living testimony of God's sovereignty, mercy, and purpose. Are you ready to uncover what has been hidden in plain sight and see the incredible truths behind the 12 tribes of Ishmael? Part 1. Ishmael's birth and God's covenant. The story of Ishmael begins with Hagar, the Egyptian maidservant of Sarah, Abraham's wife. In a time of waiting and impatience, Sarah offered Hagar to Abraham so that God's promise of descendants might be fulfilled. This human attempt to intervene in God's plan brought complications. Yet, even in this flawed scenario, God revealed his sovereignty and faithfulness. Genesis 16 records that when Hagar fled from mistreatment, the angel of the Lord found her and promised that her son would be the father of a great nation. From his very conception, Ishmael was marked by God's covenant, demonstrating that even in human error, God's plans cannot be thwarted. Ishmael's birth was not merely a historical event. It was a divine appointment with consequences that would span generations. God assured Hagar that her son would be wild in nature, yet also blessed by him. Genesis 16:12. This duality, freedom, combined with divine blessing, illustrates a principle we see throughout Scripture. God's plans often intersect with human imperfection, producing outcomes that fulfill his ultimate purpose. The birth of Ishmael is a profound reminder that God's promises are steadfast and extend beyond immediate circumstances, transcending human understanding and actions. The covenant God established with Ishmael was unique. While he confirmed that the covenant of the Messiah would pass through Isaac, He simultaneously promised to bless Ishmael and make him fruitful. Genesis 17:20 says, "As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation." This promise underscores God's justice, faithfulness, and ability to work through all lineages to accomplish his purposes. Ishmael's descendants were to have their place in history, their identity shaped by divine blessing, and their impact extending far beyond what human eyes could see. The spiritual lesson in Ishmael's birth is that God's plan is often intertwined with human imperfection, yet it cannot be thwarted. Hagar's flight, Abraham's hesitation, and Sarah's impatience all contributed to a story that might seem messy, yet God's hand was present throughout. This teaches believers that God can redeem circumstances that appear chaotic or flawed, orchestrating events for his glory and the fulfillment of his promises. Even in situations where human plans fail or mistakes are made, God remains sovereign, faithful, and capable of bringing about his divine purpose. Ishmael's covenant also highlights God's attention to the marginalized and overlooked. Hagar, a servant and foreigner, was given a promise, a blessing, and a future that reflected God's care and providence. The narrative reminds believers that God notices those whom society may overlook, elevates them according to his purposes, and ensures that his promises extend beyond human limitations. Ishmael's birth, therefore, is not only about lineage and prophecy, but also about God's character, his justice, mercy, and sovereignty, working in every life and situation. The legacy of Ishmael begins with God's covenant, but extends through generations. From his 12 sons would come tribes, nations, and lineages that shaped history in the Middle East. The covenant with Ishmael ensured that his descendants would have identity, purpose, and a place in God's broader plan. Understanding this beginning is crucial for interpreting the significance of the 12 tribes and their ongoing influence in biblical and modern contexts. The story illustrates that God's promises are not limited by circumstances, mistakes, or human impatience. They unfold according to his perfect plan. Ultimately, Ishmael's birth teaches that God's faithfulness transcends human error, and his covenantal promises extend beyond immediate circumstances. From Hagar's encounter with the angel of the Lord to Ishmael's destiny as the father of 12 tribes, we see a narrative of divine sovereignty, blessing, and purpose. This story sets the stage for understanding the formation of the 12 tribes of Ishmael, their historical significance, and the spiritual lessons embedded in their lineage. Ishmael's life reminds believers that God's promises are unfailing, his plans are perfect, and his blessings extend to all whom he chooses to include in his unfolding narrative. Part 2. The formation of the 12 tribes of Ishmael. Ishmael grew to become the father of 12 sons, each representing a tribe that carried his name, identity, and blessing into history. Genesis 25-12, 1:8 lists these sons: Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. Each name carries meaning, often reflecting character traits, destiny, or God's hand in their lineage. Understanding these tribes provides insight into how God multiplied Ishmael's descendants and positioned them within the broader history of nations. These 12 tribes are not merely genealogical markers. They are living evidence of God's promise to bless Ishmael and his descendants abundantly. The formation of the tribes signifies more than population growth. It represents God's covenantal fulfillment. Each tribe became a leader of a nation or people group, demonstrating that God's promises to Ishmael were not abstract but tangible. The tribes spread across regions that would become part of the Arabian Peninsula, influencing the culture, politics, and history of the Middle East. Their settlement patterns, alliances, and conflicts with neighboring peoples illustrate how God's providence shaped nations through this lineage. The names of the tribes themselves carry prophetic and spiritual significance. For example, Kedar is often associated with strength and resilience, while Nebaioth suggests multitudes and leadership. These designations reveal aspects of character, purpose, and destiny that God intended for Ishmael's descendants. Understanding the meaning behind each name provides deeper insight into the nature of the tribes, their historical role, and the spiritual lessons that emerge from their existence. The 12 tribes of Ishmael also demonstrate diversity within unity. Each tribe had a distinct identity, yet all were linked by lineage and divine blessing. This mirrors the broader pattern in God's plan: individuality within the framework of covenantal purpose. The unity and diversity of Ishmael's tribes illustrate how God's promises can manifest in multiple ways, creating a tapestry of influence, leadership, and spiritual impact across generations. Historically, these tribes played significant roles in interactions with Israel and other nations. Their presence is noted in trade, conflict, and alliances, shaping the political landscape of the region. They were neighbors, sometimes adversaries, and occasionally allies of Israel, serving as instruments of God's purposes in history. Understanding their historical influence sheds light on the broader narrative of God's orchestration of nations and His sovereignty in guiding human events. Spiritually, the formation of the 12 tribes teaches believers about God's faithfulness, provision, and strategic planning. Even though Ishmael's birth came through human impatience and imperfection, God's promise to him remained unbroken. The establishment of His 12 tribes fulfills this promise, showing that God works through all circumstances to accomplish His will. Believers can learn that divine purposes are not hindered by human flaws. Rather, God's plans often incorporate them to demonstrate His glory, justice, and faithfulness. Understanding the 12 tribes also has modern relevance. Many nations in the Arabian Peninsula and surrounding regions trace ancestry to Ishmael, showing how God's covenant extends beyond Israel to other peoples. Recognizing this connection allows believers to see God's hand in the history of nations, the unfolding of prophecy, and His ongoing work among all peoples. The 12 tribes are living testimony to the scope of God's promises, extending through generations and geography. Ultimately, the formation of Ishmael's 12 tribes illustrates God's precision, faithfulness, and sovereignty. Each tribe carried a purpose, a blessing, and a role in history. By examining their formation, names, influence, and spiritual significance, believers can understand how God orchestrates human events, honors His promises, and demonstrates His power across generations. The 12 tribes of Ishmael are not just ancient history. They are a revelation of God's hand at work, guiding nations, fulfilling promises, and revealing truths that challenge assumptions and deepen understanding. Part 3. Historical influence of Ishmael's descendants. The descendants of Ishmael, through his 12 tribes, played a significant role in shaping the history of the Middle East. From the earliest centuries, these tribes occupied vast territories, influencing trade routes, cultural exchanges, and political alliances. The Bible and historical records highlight how Ishmaelites interacted with Israel, neighboring nations, and emerging kingdoms, often serving as instruments of God's providential plan. Understanding their historical influence offers insight into the unfolding of God's promises and the ongoing spiritual and political dynamics in the region. Ishmael's descendants were not isolated. They were active participants in the region's development. The tribes established settlements, formed alliances, and engaged in commerce. Their presence shaped local economies, social structures, and political landscapes. The tribe of Kedar, for instance, became renowned for its flocks, tents, and caravans, contributing to regional trade and sustaining economies that interacted with Israel and other neighboring peoples. This economic and cultural influence demonstrates that Ishmael's lineage was designed to be fruitful, fulfilling God's promise that he would become a great nation. The relationship between Ishmael's tribes and Israel was complex, marked by both tension and cooperation. Biblical narratives reveal instances where the Ishmaelites served as adversaries, and others where they participated in broader communal or strategic efforts. Their interactions illustrate God's orchestration of history, where even conflicts and alliances contribute to his ultimate purposes. The historical presence of Ishmael's tribes underscores that God's promises are enacted not in isolation, but within the context of human interaction, circumstance, and history. The Ishmaelites' influence extended beyond politics and commerce into culture and spiritual symbolism. Their nomadic lifestyle, traditions, and interactions with other peoples became a living testament to God's promise to bless Ishmael and his descendants. The tribe's mobility allowed them to influence multiple regions, disseminating practices, knowledge, and cultural patterns that resonated for centuries. Through this influence, the tribes fulfilled the dual nature of God's prophecy. They would be numerous and independent, yet always under his sovereignty. Prophetically, the historical influence of Ishmael's descendants carries lessons for understanding God's hand in nations. Just as he promised that Ishmael would be fruitful and multiply, the tribes became significant players in the region's development, demonstrating the fulfillment of divine promises. These historical events are not random, but carefully orchestrated to reveal God's faithfulness, sovereignty, and the unfolding of his plan across generations. For believers today, studying these patterns deepens understanding of prophecy, history, and God's intricate guidance. The legacy of the Ishmaelites also offers spiritual lessons. Despite the circumstances of Ishmael's birth and the tension surrounding Isaac's covenant, God ensured that Ishmael's lineage would thrive. This narrative demonstrates God's ability to work through imperfect situations, human decisions, and unexpected outcomes to accomplish his purposes. The tribe's historical presence shows that even those outside the primary covenantal line are part of God's divine orchestration, emphasizing his justice, mercy, and sovereignty over all nations. Through centuries, the 12 tribes maintained a presence that influenced neighboring nations, sometimes as adversaries, other times as allies. They were witnesses to God's providence and power, demonstrating how divine promises can manifest in both blessing and challenge. The tribe's historical trajectory serves as a testimony that God's promises are enduring. His plans are precise, and his sovereignty extends over generations, shaping the course of nations for his glory. The historical influence of Ishmael's descendants also foreshadows modern geopolitical realities. Many nations in the Arabian Peninsula trace lineage to Ishmael, showing how God's covenant continues to have implications in contemporary times. Recognizing this connection allows believers to see God's hand in global history, current events, and prophetic fulfillment. The tribes are living evidence of God's promise that Ishmael would be fruitful and influential, reinforcing the relevance of biblical prophecy for understanding the present. Ultimately, the historical influence of Ishmael's tribes reveals God's faithfulness, the fulfillment of promises, and the orchestration of human events. Their economic, political, and cultural impact demonstrates that God's blessings are tangible. His purposes unfold over time, and His sovereignty extends across generations. By studying their history, believers gain insight into how God works through nations, peoples, and individuals to accomplish His plan, reminding us that His promises are never empty and His guidance is always precise. Part 4. Spiritual Lessons Hidden in the Tribes. Beyond history and genealogy, the 12 tribes of Ishmael carry profound spiritual lessons. Their lineage, actions, and destiny reflect themes of faithfulness, human choice, divine blessing, and the interplay of God's sovereignty with human decisions. Each tribe illustrates how God's promises manifest even in imperfect circumstances, and how His hand shapes outcomes for His glory. By examining these spiritual lessons, believers can understand the principles that govern God's providence and apply them to their lives today. One key lesson is that God's faithfulness is unshakable, even when circumstances appear flawed. Ishmael's birth came through human impatience, yet God fulfilled His promise to bless him and make him a great nation. This teaches believers that divine promises are not dependent on human perfection, but are accomplished through God's power, wisdom, and timing. Life may include mistakes, impatience, or unexpected events, but God's purposes remain steadfast. Another lesson lies in the balance of independence and covenantal relationship. Ishmael's tribes were numerous and independent, yet they existed alongside Israel, the covenantal nation, through Isaac. This duality shows that God can bless multiple lineages while maintaining the ultimate fulfillment of His covenant. Believers learn that God's blessings are multifaceted and that He can work through diverse paths to accomplish His will. Understanding this helps cultivate trust in God's sovereignty and patience in awaiting His promises. The tribes also illustrate the consequences of human choices. Ishmael's life was shaped by the circumstances of his birth, his mother's flight, and Abraham's decisions. His descendants inherited both blessings and challenges as a result of these choices. This teaches that while God's plans are unthwartable, human actions have real consequences. And understanding this dynamic encourages believers to pursue righteousness, make wise decisions, and trust God's guidance in every stage of life. Prophetic symbolism emerges from the 12 tribes as well. Their spread across regions, influence on neighboring peoples, and enduring legacy reflect God's ability to orchestrate history and fulfill promises across generations. Each tribe's character, name, and destiny offer insight into the principles of God's blessing, human responsibility, and divine oversight. For believers, studying these patterns provides lessons on faithfulness, stewardship, and spiritual discernment. The relationship between Ishmael's tribes and Israel offers additional spiritual insight. Interactions ranged from conflict to cooperation, highlighting God's ability to integrate diverse lineages into His overarching plan. This interplay teaches believers about patience, reconciliation, and the recognition that God's purposes often transcend human rivalry or competition. The tribes demonstrate that God's sovereignty encompasses nations, individuals, and historical events in ways that are purposeful and redemptive. The endurance of Ishmael's tribes also reflects God's blessing over time. Despite challenges and opposition, The tribes remained fruitful and influential, demonstrating the long-term impact of God's promises. Believers learn that faithfulness, perseverance, and reliance on God produce results that transcend immediate circumstances, reinforcing the importance of trust, patience, and spiritual focus. Ultimately, the 12 tribes of Ishmael reveal that spiritual lessons are embedded in history and lineage. They teach about God's faithfulness, the consequences of human choice, the complexity of covenantal relationships, and the enduring nature of divine blessing. By studying these tribes, believers gain insight into how God orchestrates His plans, maintains His promises, and uses diverse people and circumstances to accomplish His purposes. The story of Ishmael and his descendants is not just historical. It is profoundly instructive, offering lessons in trust, obedience, and recognition of God's hand in all things. Part 5. The Legacy and Modern Relevance of Ishmael's Tribes. The legacy of Ishmael's 12 tribes extends far beyond biblical times into the present, shaping nations, cultures, and spiritual realities. Their descendants, spread across the Arabian Peninsula and surrounding regions, remain a testimony to God's faithfulness and sovereignty. The tribes became influential in commerce, politics, and cultural development, leaving a mark on history that is still evident today. Understanding their modern relevance allows believers to see God's hand at work across generations and recognize His orchestration of events that unfold according to His divine plan. The 12 tribes' legacy is also spiritual. Each tribe reflects principles that continue to teach lessons about God's covenant, human choice, and divine providence. Their persistence, influence, and interactions with surrounding nations serve as a reminder that God's promises endure through time, even when human circumstances are complex or challenging. Observing how Ishmael's descendants impacted history, believers can see patterns of God's blessing and sovereignty that transcend time, reminding us that His plans unfold in ways that are often beyond immediate understanding. Modern relevance also lies in the geopolitical impact of Ishmael's descendants. Many nations in the Middle East trace ancestry to Ishmael, reflecting the fulfillment of God's promise that he would become a great nation. These descendants continue to influence cultural, political, and spiritual dynamics in the region. Understanding these connections provides insight into current events through a biblical lens, demonstrating that God's promises are not only historical, but also ongoing. Believers can see God's providence in shaping nations, guiding events, and fulfilling His covenantal words in real time. The tribe's influence also offers spiritual lessons for believers today. Just as God blessed Ishmael and his descendants, He continues to work through various peoples and nations to accomplish His purposes. Their story demonstrates that God's blessings may manifest in unexpected ways through individuals, communities, or entire nations. Believers are encouraged to trust God's plan, recognize His sovereignty, and understand that His work extends far beyond the visible, immediate outcomes. The 12 tribes serve as a powerful illustration of God's capacity to fulfill promises in ways that humans might not anticipate. Culturally, Ishmael's descendants have contributed to literature, commerce, traditions, and societal structures throughout the Middle East. Their nomadic and settled patterns influence trade, alliances, and interactions with neighboring nations, including Israel. These historical contributions reveal that God's promises often include influence, stewardship, and impact beyond spiritual realms, demonstrating how divine blessing translates into tangible results in the world. Spiritually, the modern relevance of Ishmael's tribes reminds believers to reflect on God's purposes in every generation. The tribe's endurance and fruitfulness illustrate that God's promises are cumulative and long-term, unfolding across centuries. Just as the tribes shaped their regions, believers today are called to live faithfully, knowing that God works through both individuals and communities to accomplish His eternal purposes. This perspective encourages patience, trust, and recognition of God's hand in shaping events for His glory. The legacy of Ishmael's tribes also intersects with prophetic understanding. Their influence and positioning among nations demonstrate God's intricate orchestration of history, revealing His sovereignty and foresight. Studying their legacy allows believers to discern patterns of blessing, judgment, and purpose, providing insight into how God fulfills promises through human history. This perspective deepens faith, encourages prayerful observation of current events, and fosters understanding of God's active involvement in the world. Ultimately, the legacy and modern relevance of Ishmael's tribes teach believers about God's faithfulness, the enduring nature of His promises, and the ongoing impact of His covenantal blessings. Their history, influence, and continued presence illustrate that God's plan unfolds across generations, shaping nations and peoples to fulfill His purposes. Understanding their legacy offers encouragement, insight, and spiritual perspective, revealing that God's hand is continually at work, guiding history and fulfilling His promises in ways that are both profound and enduring. Conclusion: understanding God's sovereignty through Ishmael's tribes. The story of Ishmael and his 12 tribes is more than genealogy or history. It is a vivid demonstration of God's sovereignty, faithfulness, and purpose. From the moment of Ishmael's birth to the formation of his 12 tribes, God's hand was evident, guiding events, blessing his descendants, and orchestrating their place in history. Their influence, interactions, and legacy reveal truths about divine promises, human choices, and the unfolding of God's plan across generations. By examining Ishmael's birth, the formation of his tribes, their historical influence, spiritual lessons, and modern relevance, believers gain profound insight into God's ability to work through all circumstances. Even human impatience, imperfection, and complexity cannot thwart His promises. The 12 tribes serve as a testament that God fulfills His covenantal words, blesses according to His purpose, and orchestrates history to align with His eternal plan. Understanding Ishmael's legacy encourages believers to recognize God's hand in all aspects of life. His sovereignty extends across nations, generations, and centuries. What may appear as random events or human decisions are often part of a larger divine design. The 12 tribes of Ishmael exemplify how God integrates diverse lineages, circumstances, and histories into His purposeful plan, demonstrating that His wisdom and timing surpass human understanding. This story also invites reflection on spiritual lessons for believers today. The tribes remind us that God's promises endure, that His blessing can manifest even in unexpected ways, and that He works through both individuals and nations to accomplish His purposes. Believers are encouraged to trust in God's faithfulness, discern His guidance, and remain vigilant in understanding His plan across generations. Ultimately, the hidden truths of the 12 tribes of Ishmael reveal that God's sovereignty is absolute, His promise is unbreakable, and His plan unfolding with precision across time. By studying their story, believers gain perspective on history, prophecy, and spiritual principles, understanding that God's work encompasses all people and nations. The legacy of Ishmael's tribes is a powerful reminder that His hand is always at work, bringing blessing, shaping destiny, and fulfilling His eternal purpose. Are you ready to see God's hand in ways you never imagined? To understand history, prophecy, and his ongoing work among nations? The story of Ishmael's 12 tribes is not just a tale of the past, it is a revelation of God's sovereignty, his faithfulness, and his divine orchestration that continues to unfold even today.